What's going on, folks? This is your host, GBs, and welcome to Into the Squared Circle podcast. That's right, folks. From a fan to the fans, we talk about all things pro wrestling. And for the Weekend Insider, which this is episode's all about, right? What went down over this past weekend? Oh, man. I'll give you guys my top highlights for WWE SmackDown this past Friday on the USA Network. Wrong, Fox. See, I correct myself really quick here. And one highlight from All Elite Wrestling Rampage went live on TNT this past Friday. And one highlight for All Elite Wrestling Collision that went down this past Saturday on TNT. Bunch of other wrestling stuff as well. But by the way, before I continue on, follow me on my social media platforms Into the Square Circle podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, and right here on YouTube as well. Hit the subscribe now. And as I mentioned, it's a podcast, right? Available on all major podcasting outlets like Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. So wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, just type in Into the Squared Circle podcast. All right, good deal. But shut the hell up. Let's talk about my top highlights for WWE SmackDown, AEW Rampage, and All Elite Wrestling Collision coming up next right here on Into the Squared Circle podcast. All right, folks. Hope you had a great weekend. If not, grab a cold brew. Cheers. All right, good deal. I'm not going to reveal what I'm drinking, but it's ice cold beverage, of course. If you're driving to work, if you're driving into work and you listen on the podcast, just, you know what? Just go to work. Just bring a case of beer and go to work. Just tell your boss that you have permission from GBs. Now, if your boss is like, well, who the hell is this guy? Why do I care about pro wrestling? Number one, slap him in the face. Number two, tell him that Into the Square Circle podcast is a kick-ass podcast for pro wrestling. Three, tell him he has a secondary podcast called A Lesson in Headbanging Podcast. Yeah, it's for you if you're a fan of rock, hard rock, and heavy metal. By the way, next episode on the Lesson in Headbanging Podcast, we'll talk about Slipknot. Jay Weinberg got fired from Slipknot. I am shocked. And Jay released his statement over this past weekend, so we will talk about that. Welcome to Rockville, which is going down in Florida. An awesome bill, of course, of 4 days of rock and roll. And the Milwaukee Metal Fest is returning in 2024. There's a pretty good chance I will be there, right? So that's for that podcast. But on this episode, all things pro wrestling. Speaking of pro wrestling, let's talk about DDT Japanese wrestling promotion went down this past weekend. Yeah, Chris Jericho decided to face Takeshita, Konosuke Takeshita, one-on-one, a pro wrestling match over there in Japan, of course. Tokyo, Japan, to be exact. Chris Jericho defeated Takeshita by pinfall, of course. And go check it out on YouTube, man. Chris Jericho on his was his pre-press conference in Japan. This is the beauty part, doing a press conference in Japan where Jericho get pissed off. He start flipping tables, start flipping off at the reporters. Beautiful. Only in Japan you can get away doing this shit, right? You can't do this in the United States, right? Fucking Dave Meltzer, Brian Alvarez, who else? Sean Sapp, flipping tables, flipping them off. I mean, you could do that. But, I mean, they did that in Japan, or at least Jericho did. It's old-fashioned Chris Jericho, and I loved it. But nonetheless, Jericho defeated Takeshita in Tokyo, Japan at DDT Pro Wrestling. We had a lovely female who did a retirement ceremony there. And Shinsuke Nakamura did a backstage pre-video promo to this lovely lady who is retiring on the show. And it was nice. It was nice not only for Shinsuke, But it was nice for the WWE to allow Shinsuke to cut a promo. Of course, they got to put a giant Monday Night Raw screen right behind him, right, to show he's WWE brand ambassador. But it's pretty nice that he's cutting a promo for this lovely lady who's retiring in DDT promotions. So how about that? All right, so that went down over the weekend. We got Andrade El Idolo is going to make his GCW debut in December. So that's going to be going down in a couple months as well. And All Elite Wrestling has announced a Continental Round Robin tournament, which is going to start in Chicago in a couple weeks, Thanksgiving week. So right here in Chicago at the Wintrust Arena. It's a busy week in Chicago, by the way. We got Dynamite that Wednesday at Wintrust. We have Survivor Series at the Allstate Arena across town that coming Saturday. So a lot of pro wrestling going down right here in Chicago that week. Let's see how much I contend, but we'll have to wait and see about that. Okay, so we got that going on. All right. So I'm going to shut the hell up, take a quick commercial break, and we come back. I will give you guys 3 highlights for All Elite Wrestling Dynamite, wrong, Collision, Rampage, and WWE SmackDown. 3 highlights, 1 for each, after we take this quick commercial break. And welcome back, folks. If you're watching on YouTube, cheers to you again. Take a swig. All right. Right down the throat. That's what she said. All right. So let's talk about number 1 highlight. Just a little bit of chronological order here. We'll start with WWE SmackDown this past Friday on Fox. The top highlight, and I got to say, I love the LA Knight promo against Grayson Waller. Phenomenal. He's like, Grayson Waller? The Grayson Waller effect sounds like a STD disease. I thought it was hilarious. But the LA Knight promo, fiery. It was passion. I'd enjoyed it. I mean, he took it like a man. He took the loss like a man since he got lost by Roman Reigns this past weekend at Crown Jewels. So, props to him, man, being ballsy, going out there and telling the crowd that he let everybody down, but he's one pissed off mofo. But that was an awesome moment. But the top highlight for WWE SmackDown for me, which was the main event. So it was supposed to be a multi-women tag match here, folks. We have Charlotte Flair, Bianca Belair, and Asuka will team against Damage Control, right? Bayley, Io Sky, and the newly addition to the women's roster, Kairi Sane. Okay, 3-on-3 main event match here, folks. Long story short, Asuka decided to double cross Charlotte and Bianca and joined forces with Kairi Sane and the Damage Control by jumping the other women. And the show ended with Kairi Sane and Asuka, Io Sky, all 3 standing there with Bayley, Dakota Kai, a Dominic faction. Maybe they're teasing something, folks, as we talked about it a few episodes ago. That makes sense, right? Asuka, Kairi Sane, and Io Sky. That would be a dominant women's faction right there. And I dig it. I dig it. And that moment alone was unique. It was different. And I enjoyed it. And that was my number 1 highlight for WWE SmackDown. All right, so shortly after SmackDown went off air, we have All Elite Wrestling Rampage, a rare Rampage live on TNT. Now, the reason they did that is they taped Collision this past Saturday, I assume at the same arena, right before Rampage. So they taped Collision, got that out of the way, and then they end up doing Rampage live. So Collision tape, Rampage live. So Rampage went on air, and it's pretty decent, of course. But the match I thought was very unique on All Elite Wrestling Rampage and TNT. It was the main event, another main event match. Hell, all three of my top highlights are main events. So there we go. Little hint here for the next one. But for Rampage, it was FTR versus Commander and El Hijo de Vikingo in a tag team match. Talk about a unique styles of Clash of Pro Wrestling. Again, FTR, old school territory style, Midnight Express style wrestling. And then you have Vikingo and Commander, very young kids. I assume they're probably in their 20s or 30s. Luchador, really fast, obnoxious, crazy moves they do. And you put 2 and 2 together, it makes it very unique. And I found it a phenomenal match for FTR and versus Commander and Vikingo. So I thought it was a great main event. My assumption FTR won. And I think after the match, the lights went out and there was a backstage promo of the House of Black clapping, just congrats and FTR for the win. That was it. And Rampage went off here. So I thought that was a great match for the main event of Rampage, and a great highlight, great number one highlight for my pick for All Elite Wrestling Rampage. By the way, between Rampage Friday and Collision Saturday, they've been featuring heavily on this whole Masked Devil thing between him and MJF. So there's something with this here, folks. We'll keep our eyes peeled on that. All right, so let's talk about All Elite Wrestling Collision. My top highlight this past Saturday on TNT. It was a great, solid show this past Saturday, of course. But going back and look at it now, the top highlight, and look, what's her name from Willow Nightingale faced the lovely female from the House of Black. And I'm drawing a blank here, but a hell of a match. Great women's match. But the main event was the Righteousness, right? Vincent, Dutch, and Lance Archer versus the Rated R superstar Adam Copeland versus Sting versus Darby Allin. 3-on-3. Hell of a match. Great match, of course. Of course, the outcome, spoiler if you haven't watched it, Team Sting did wing. Sting did win. And you know what? It was a hell of a match. It was unique. It was dynamic. It's different. And of course, after the match, Christian Cage, Nick Wayne, and Luchasaurus came out to confront them because obviously they both teams have a hot date at Full Gear. By the way, I'll have my Full Gear previews and predictions next week, of course. But I thought it was very unique. It was different. I enjoyed Sting as always. Seen him many times in the ring. Phenomenal. Seeing him with Adam Copeland and Darby, just extra special. The crowds were chanting, holy, you know what I mean? They enjoyed it. The Oakland, California crowd enjoyed that match. And hands down, I loved it. I loved it. Again, Dutch, I don't know what is he. He's a big guy who, like a lizard. You got Vincent like to snap his fingers. And I'm a big fan of Lance Archer. Even his days in New Japan, which he still does go over there as well. So I enjoy Lance Archer. I can't speak tonight. I got to lay off the liquor. But, it's a good tag team main event to make the number one top highlight for me for All Elite Wrestling Collision on TNT. All right. So did you watch WWE SmackDown? Did you watch AEW Rampage or Collision this past Friday or Saturday on TNT? Let me know what you guys think. If you're watching on YouTube, drop it in the comment section. What matches you enjoy throughout those 3 shows, or what favorite show do you enjoyed, or which one you just did not give a rat's ass. Again, your opinions matter. Okay, these are my opinions. Now, what's yours? And if you're listening on the podcast or on YouTube, follow me on my social media platforms into the Square Circle Podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram and right here on YouTube. Hit the subscribe. And wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts like Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and more. So wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, subscribe today. All right, folks, until midweek, we'll talk about WWE Raw. I'll have my previews and predictions for All Elite Wrestling Full Gear. Well, I guess we'll mention about Dynamite this coming Wednesday. And what else is going on in pro wrestling. Until next time, my friends, hope you had a great weekend. Enjoy yourself a great week as always, as we itching towards Thanksgiving. Hopefully I'll speak better next time. Until next time, horns up and happy wrestling. Bye-bye, everybody.